Welcome to the KALÀ Commune Podcast, where we bring you conversations with South Asia's most compelling artists, founders, and thought leaders. We're on a mission to archive these voices, bridge communities, and foster a richer global understanding of the South Asian art world. I'm really excited about my guest today, Raki Nikahetiya. Raki is a Sri Lankan Austrian multidisciplinary artist and also the co-founder of Ladakh, a wonderful platform that was launched in 2023 in Ladakh, and the highest altitude art festival in the world. Mm-hmm. Raki, we've known each other since 2016 when we worked together on Coast and Concrete, an exhibition of your photography in a project where you were engaging with the fishing community in Sri Lanka. Mm-hmm. You've come a long way since and done so much amazing work in the visual arts community. Welcome, Raki, to our KALÀ Commune Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Raki, I thought we might actually start talking a little bit about your roots. When we first met, you were based in Austria. You were kind of in between. You were looking to move back to Sri Lanka. You were between Sri Lanka and Austria, but mainly in Europe. Mm-hmm. And today you are working really across the world, I would say, but your main base has become Colombo.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're also very established in the Indian art space as well. You've done some amazing projects. The most recent one for us that was presented at the India Art Fair. Can you talk a little bit about this journey of, your move from journalism to the visual arts practice you're now fully engaged with, and just take us through that transition time?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And that path was completely unplanned and unchoreographed over the years. So when I was 5 years old, we were in Peradeniya in Kandy, and then during the time of war and unrest, when things were starting to change drastically, my parents decided to move. My dad was in academia during that period at the uni there, and the change came abrupt because of things happening as well. A lot of academics who were liberal getting attacked during the period. So there was a change, and they thought for their own safety that they will move out of Sri Lanka during that period. And that was in 89. So that was sort of when things were really intensifying. So experienced a lot during that period as well, seen things during that period, and then growing up moving to Austria was completely different because it was like a complete different context. And during that period, there were not many Sri Lankans there, South Asians at all. So it was a very different context of growing up, which also really was formative, I think. So there was this, on the one side, this tropical jungleness of Sri Lanka, and then on the other side, Vienna, which is the classical city in one way or another, but also not very diverse. During the early 90s, I think the most diverse was a Chinese and Italian restaurant during that period. Not, of course, Vienna changed massively now, and then very good Indian restaurant. But Vienna changed a lot during that period, and for me, it became really a home, and Austria became a real home. But went also all the time back to Sri Lanka to see the family. So there was this strange existence where you have adapt to different cultures, and you basically bring these cultures together. So ever since, that was the question of what is identity for me in that kind of context. So from there, studied there, grew up in Austria, studied abroad, did not know what I want to do, but I always wanted to do art, but that's not a profession. What you do normally as a South Asian kid, you're told not to do it. So that was, I think, a reflective moment where you do things because you're told to do things, and you go ahead with it, and you do it for as long as you think you can do it, and you become good in it. And just because you're good at something doesn't really necessarily mean that's the thing for you. So it took for me a long time to realize that, I think. And the friends along the way were really helpful in that kind of process to do it. So all these friends, I had a very long discussion with a friend of mine yesterday, and we know each other since we're 6 years old. And although the life has changed in that kind of way, sort of friendships have kept ongoing over the period. And that also kept me afloat, I think, like moving in these different countries and so on. And so Austria was like, I think, the base for most of it, for the exploration, and then studying. I did economics. And when I started working,
in journalism.
In journalism, yeah. So I did economics, and I found it terribly boring during that period. but I just did it. You know, it was the thing to do, and did it. And then I found journalism really exciting. Did that for a while. Was covering politics in Austria, and that was sort of also very interesting. Very extreme period. There was like the right wing was on the rise in Central Europe, and there was as a South Asian person to cover that, there was also like an interesting experience. But then one day, photographer couldn't come, and I said, "Well, I have a camera. I can take the shots as well." And then I started enjoying that more. So ever since I was a kid, I was always painting and like drawing, but I was doing it sort of on the side. And never really fully. And I was never trained as an artist during that period, only later on. And photography was for me the gateway drug into arts, I think, apart from painting. And that helped me really to, I think, sharpen a sense to see the world in a different way, or like focus into the things which I found are essential. So photography was, I think, that sort of first love, which journalism helped me to gain.
Crossover point for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Really, really, very much so. And I got my first camera when I was studying. I was in Maastricht when I did economics, and I had this, it was a flea market, and I had like limited funds available. So I got this like second-hand camera there, and that was sort of the starting point.
Yeah. And when did you make that decision to completely transition?
That was much later on. So there was certain moments, and the narrative mind, when you look back at your life, explains everything, right? In that kind of context, why everything happened in that way. But I think it's true. I needed to go through this little hoops to figure out what I want to become. And they are still an essential part of my process now. After journalism, I was in mid-20s and had the feeling of, okay, you want to do something, and whatever support something or change the world in one way or another. And so you're blue-eyed and I want to do X, Y, Z. So I was lucky enough to get a role with the UN. And so I was like working with them on projects. And the first one was actually in Sri Lanka. And that was very exciting.
And was that coincidental?
I think so, because you search for meaning, I guess, in one way or another. And in that search, that role came up. And it was in a way like, always like trying to close circles and more close circles, and like figuring things out. And that was, I think, the part where this role in doing things, sustainably, working with people from different backgrounds was very exciting. And you could get to see, like, apart from the things you do at the office, really amazing places and meet really amazing people. Which are not in the Lonely Planet, and you can go and like experience that firsthand. That was very exciting, and there's where I met Sarah as well.
Okay.
Whom you know very well, of course. And so that was the period where we met, and we were babies back then, like mid-20s, and we decided to move to London during that period. So Sarah had this amazing job opportunity there as a civil servant, and we moved there. And during that period, I was still working with the UN, but I was doing more and more arts, almost like secretly, and like doing it inside. I did more photographs, and every minute I could get, I would be in a museum or a gallery, and there was, like, you might feel it the same way. It's your people, it's your happy place. You can be whatever you want to be. There's no judgment in that kind of way. Yeah. So you do it under disguise, but it's the thing which keeps you going.
Yeah.
So I was doing that, and then I started with the British Standards Body role after that. So none of this has to do with art, but for me, there's
it's
everything.
interesting because I think it's still very connected to that journey and what in relation to where we will come to soon, which is what you're doing now.
Yeah. So all of this was necessary. So I had this job where you're traveling here and there, and it's very exciting on paper. You're like one day in Hong Kong, and then you go to like Manila, and then you travel here and there, and you have this very intense on paper, exciting life, but then inside it's just you are just a clog in the system. So you do that, and you go from position to position, I think, but it was not in a way resolving me anything. So like then I had this project in Mongolia, and I went there. I worked for a few years, back and forth. And that's when we got in touch, actually, during that period. And I was doing more photography, and I was like really loving it. And, that was very exciting. But then I was having this role. And one day, there was an event with different people from different organizations getting together. And it was a long night. And I was there in the middle of this place in Ulaanbaatar in a bar. And it was called The Step In, was part of a wider network. And then it was minus 40 degrees, and we were in this area, and it was like 2 a.m. in the morning. And there's this one guy sitting on the other side, and somebody was talking to him, and we started talking. And we talked about lemmergeier, which is a very niche type of vulture, which is in Mongolia, but also in Austria. And for whatever reason, we connected on that, and we started chatting the whole night. And that was the person who got me then from this job, which is looking at sustainable development, into conservation. So then I switched the roles where I thought like, okay, I'm going to do something with nature, which was very important to me always. I was volunteering in London for the London Wildlife Trust and so on. So like, apart from going to galleries and museums and seeing art, that was my other happy place in nature. And that's again, going back to youth in one way or another. And so then I changed from that sort of role, and I was really lucky enough where I applied for it, and Sarah said like, you should go for it. And I said like, I'm never going to get it. And then I did marine conservation. So like went into that complete different realm of that. And that was exciting, and it was really interesting to work with scientists, and you are in like really interesting locations, from like barrier reefs, you go like snorkeling for like the seahorses, and do environmental protection work. And this was really interesting. So that was the first time where I made all these connections through like photography, but then this was more like a managerial role. But you get to see all these spaces and see environment also changing firsthand. So all of this influenced me deeply, I think. And all these different hats you wear as identity as well. You shift, no? I mean, like we are multitudes of things to multitudes of people in one way or another. Yeah. But who are you actually when you go into this deeper core? So like there was this unmaking process, I think, which needed, for me at least, like a lot of time to like go through that. And that process was necessary. And at some point when we were back in London and the work got bigger and bigger and the role got more intense, that was when I pulled the plug in that kind of way. Because I saw also like with that idea of identity, a lot of people becoming these roles and representing organizations. Yeah. But then when the moment they retire, they have a loss of identity. Right. Like who are they if they're not representing X, Y, Z? And then the status and all these things became in a way meaningless. And that's where the Slate really changed my life. So like I did this foundation at the Slate in London, which is focusing on like contemporary fine art. But I was so concept oriented all my life. There has to be a plan, and like very rational, like economist thinking of like X, you need to do like a rational form to like come to that equation. Yeah. But then the Slate taught me to be a kid again, where the process there was, you play with things, you go around, there's no limits. Yeah. And that was exciting. So like, there was the changing point. And all throughout, I think my biggest supporter was Sarah. I think like you need as an artist or create, I think that balance between each other. Yeah.
And someone to give you that confidence that it's okay to make that decision and at a later point in life, or not that late, but later. Yeah. When you've already kind of invested yourself in this direction. Yeah. Because you have to be really brave to make that decision, don't you? To kind of say, okay, it's okay. Yeah.
And slightly stupid. So I think both of it is very important, I think, because it's not a rational decision.
Yeah.
But I think for me as well, like I through that intense work, which I didn't mention, there are certain parts which are really interesting, like I think connecting these dots. And I think my body gave in at some point as well. And so I got like during this extreme path of work, which is very exciting on the outside, but in the inside, literally in the inside, my body was rebelling, because the body will always say something very quietly until it's until
but
it's
I
loud.
totally get that, because I had a similar experience, because I tried to follow a path completely away from the arts, and my body completely rebelled. And it's interesting because it's what is rationale, right? What is our rationale? It's not, I don't think it's irrational. I think it's just what you're meant to do and how you're built. And that's why it fits so easily, you know? But
very interesting.
Did you feel you needed to go to the Slade and do that beginning to really put yourself in that space? That was a necessity for you. And then when you finished with your course, you immediately entered the visual art space, and you were done with everything else.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting for people who would be listening in, because there are so many people engaged with the arts community who are also engaged because they have oftentimes this urge or yearning to be more involved, to even follow a path similar to this. But it is such a scary transition when you feel that you've already begun a different direction to completely switch in another. But it's not an impossibility. I mean, you know, I've worked with practitioners who make that decision even in their 50s. So it can happen. It is a possibility. So your first exhibition was a 2016 exhibition, but already you were engaging with the community. It was not photography. I wouldn't say this was documentary photography on its own. You had very much engaged in the community that you were documenting. You spoke of your experience with the community, your observations with the community. So it was already very much aligning with your work in the environment and conservation. And then after those projects, how did your practice become more diverse in towards becoming a multidisciplinary artist? Today, you're working with craftspeople, you're working with workshops, you're working with all types of, material practice, I would say, in a really engaged manner, but with a very clear focus. How has that kind of progressed?
Yeah, so the process in it was, I think the first exhibition, which was self-funded, and we did it with the gallery in Vienna in 2013, and it was all on photography, was basically this like blank canvas to put out the ideas first, and then other things came. And I think with the process of like becoming an artist, that was the biggest thing, to like say that word, like you're an artist and that's what you do. And there's no going back, because if you have another profession, you go into retirement at some point. As an artist, you never retire. You can't. You just need to keep on doing what you're doing until you can't anymore. But that process was really, really great to like feel. And also I think that multidisciplinarity of like my other previous roles and so on was again going back into my youth, I think. Like, so it was this curiosity which never left me, I think. And that was also the fun bit, because I remember when I said no to that previous life, there was at London Zoo, and I was walking across Regent's Park, and I could feel that like liberation in me, you know, like it was like incredible, that feeling, but also a bit of a worry about what's next when you're doing art. So I think what really helped me in the process of like becoming and using the different disciplines were chats which I had with artists. So there was this amazing thing called New Exhibitions in London, where as a website, when you go there, you have all the openings. And you have invites to all, from the White Cube to the smallest gallery. And I used to go to a lot of them, and I used to speak with the artists there and just ask them for advice and thoughts, what they were doing and so on. And one of the things which I will never forget was Tracy Emin. So there was a book signing. I was like really scared to ask her, because she's Tracy Emin. And she was like signing these books very, very quickly and going one by one. And again, Sarah said, like, ask the question. And I was like, I said, like, what makes a good artist? And I said like, Miss, I mean, what makes a good artist? And she looked at me for a second, very straight in my eye, and looked away for a second, then looked back and said like, learn to draw, work really hard, there's no shortcuts. And then she was back at signing again. And that was the best advice ever.
Yeah,
I thought.
I love that. Oh, wow.
It was incredible. So like for me, it was like, wow.
Yeah.
And you could get to see all these like different artists and so on. So these exchanges were important. And then there was the first thing, and then the slate, of course, which was there. And then moving, then Sarah had the opportunity to go to India. So I was just getting into the arts and like being in London, figuring out the process. And while doing that thing, what we showed at KALÀ as well, that work, for example, Ultrastructure of Britain, was a work which was in the making for 6 years. And I was procrastinating a lot because I wanted to perfect it more and more. And then coming back to the question, what really unwinded is you need to go into the path, because otherwise you don't know what's going to happen if you're just behind, or like just being in the studio and just doing things and not sharing it, or like going in the move of experimentation, fear, and like you just have to keep on walking, I think. And then moving to India, that was when actually a big shift happened. And I'm going to sound esoteric. India changed my life, but like it did in a certain way that, the friendships which came out of India and the closeness of it. And to be honest, being Sri Lankan, India was not in my radar of a place to go. So we were deciding between Beijing and Delhi because of Sarah's role. And Delhi came to place because also it was closer to Sri Lanka. And we had this whole idea about this project which we're doing in Sri Lanka currently. All of this came together somehow, and India changed the aspect of doing arts through, again, this community approach of like seeing different crafts, learning from them, but spending really a lot of time in there. So I think for me, the expression in terms of finding a medium is actually what is the best way to resolve something as a thought. So that's why the materiality is very important. But I think that the thought of like feeling of solace when you see something and you feel, it makes somehow sense, even for that split second, then the search for materiality becomes. And only by doing, you go into the depth of this like material. And then, of course, later on, you tell yourself these narratives, why I use this material and all these kind of things. But I think in the process, normally when you do stuff, at least for lots of friends who are artists or who are process-oriented, you don't have a clue what you're doing. You just have to do it. You just process it and then you do it. And by the end of it, you might put a title on it. But while you're doing it, you don't, at least for me, I don't know what kind of title this has. It's just like a resolving.
It's a process. But how do you begin? How do you begin?
With an urge.
With an urge and with an idea. And would you say when these urges come, or these ideas come of a project, you have that intention to engage in the subjects, that how does that begin in your mind as a practitioner? That moment where, for example, with forest, how did that idea come about?
That I think also through youth, the idea. And it was always the search for youth and going back to certain things which you want to recreate and relive, and gives you solace in that way, like finding your voice in the kind of context. I was talking the other day with a scientist, and he had a very super interesting job. He was researching fruit flies.
We're going from vultures to fruit flies.
Yeah, he knew a lot about fruit flies, but we were talking, and he said like something interesting. He was like, art and science is very related. And I said, how? And he said like, how? And he said like, we're trying to solve a problem. And he said, what is different is that with science, you go from A to B, you try to in a straight line. At least how he described it. But with art, you go in circles. But the end is also there. So I think this circularity was something which was important to me. So like sometimes I work with materials over and over, or like I use a subject like images from my grandmother's album. I paint them, I use them in different contexts, in different materials until something makes click. And until that, you play around with it. With forest, too, was the process of my childhood memory of forest, was this sort of habitat of, we had this place outside of Kandy, which is very tropical and lush. And that was sort of a safe space. And to recreate that safe space was that little habitat which we created. And then in hindsight, of course, it creates like carbon capture and all these other things linked to it. But ultimately, it's just the forest which I remember from childhood. So like you recreate that, or the forest of Austria. And then this was sort of the happy place. So you try to recreate that. And then it just makes you really happy. So like, I think it's that. So there's a deeper sense which you can write and explain in a curatorial note.
Yeah.
But I think the real thing of art, which I try to like, in a way, go to more and more, is when you look at something and you just get an emotion out of it. Either as an artist or as the other person. It's just like this warmth or like this, or like something, just something comes out of you, right? And that's with music, it's the same thing with visual arts, with whatever it's creative. It's just how to get that emotion out. And that's the question I have. And it was so nice to see like also children in that forest going in there, and we recorded this was also like a collaborative piece. So that was very important that I mention all these people who work to build something which is that scale. You need to work with others, no?
Yeah.
So from sculptors to friends who collaborated with, to Kaushik who did the recording. We went into the forest in Sanjavan to collect for like hours and hours these recordings, and put it on that you could listen what this forest might become as it grows older. So, for example, the forest itself is a growing work, like literally, because it's now as a public art piece in Delhi, and you can visit it, and it will keep on growing. So there was a beautiful idea to think about that art also, apart from that emotion, could have a purpose.
That's really important. And I think oftentimes that's not necessarily thought of in projects such as that. What's going to happen to this artwork afterwards? And did you know at the beginning that that's where the artwork was going to go, or did that all kind of transpire throughout the project?
That was the idea from the beginning, in terms of, I think, the circularity of making, or the circularity of art. Then that was in a way like that old thinking which came into that new thinking. If we use already so much space, for me, but the India Art Fair, there's amazing art and there's lots going on, and just to create that safe space where you can have a rest. But also, if you put more art in there, I wanted to do something which potentially has a use afterwards as well. And I wanted to work with material, beautify it in one way or another, which is already waste. So we worked with like 12 tons of debris, and the company who was supporting it, Max Estates in India, they were looking at sustainability, and they were open enough to look at their own waste. We said, like, if you do it, why don't we look at your own waste? And then we worked with sculptors together to build this structure, which was just a casing for this little forest.
Yeah.
So the idea was there already to have longevity in that project. And it was called Forest 2 because the other forest is the one we are currently doing in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
But that was it. So the name came after, but the idea was again in the making, but maybe for a longer time than I actually think I have. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the project that you're working on in Sri Lanka now?
Oh, it's also forest.
Yeah.
It's outside of Colombo, and it's a family place which my grandfather had, and traditionally they were growing coconuts in there. And over the past almost 10 years, we've been changing it into like a permaculture forest. So it's looking at sustaining and maintaining endemic trees of Sri Lanka, but also some which are critically endangered. So I work with like really lovely friends on that as well, to introduce species which needs protection, and it's in a way an archive of habitat, and it creates also like everything is changing. So it's in a way for me as a creator, an art piece as well, because you constantly do something as you put like paint on the paper, it does something, and it does something with you as well. And to see change and morph over the period of time and looking back, it's amazing to archive and document it and how quick things are growing. So that's it. But with that also, it invites other beings into it. So we just recently did like a pond, and it was a lot of work to do a pond, and it's a wild one. And there's a little spot in the middle where it's like there's trees growing and so on. And all of a sudden, when you're exhausted and you just look at it and you're feeling very happy with it, little ducks start coming in, wild geese. So like it was like incredibly beautiful to see that evolving as well. So to create this sort of habitat around it, and we want to make it as a open space later on.
And you plan to reside there as well?
Yes, I think to set up a studio space as well. I think we will be still moving here and there because of the work, but I think that's going to be sort of a happy place. I think where we want to also share that with others.
Yeah, and beyond this, is there anything else that you're working on at the moment? We'll come to Ladakh.
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about this after that. But before we move on, I want to ask you that separately, just with your practice specifically.
Yes, I think again I go back into memory and childhood there, and when you have rupture, you want to like close that rupture in one way or another. And so my grandmother had this amazing photo album where she did little notes like of photographs from the 1930s onwards, I think. And she had this amazing collections of Cadbury and Nestle, different posters and cards, which she kept like meticulously. And this amazing photo album was like beautiful. It's like blue paper and then black and white photographs, and it kept dissolving over the period. The humidity does not it's not very supportive to celluloid. So like it's just like kept changing. And so I started documenting it over and over 10 years now. And I just keep on going back to it. So I started doing embroideries about these like people which were really significant. People I sometimes do not even know who they were because there's no names on them, but they were some relatives. Others are well documented and they're there. But then I started doing that more and more. And now I go back to that childhood feel of using oil pastels, which I always used to do. So that was sort of really a thing. So I now paint every day that. So that's sort of my meditation in that kind of way.
Oh, wonderful.
So I keep on painting these like figures, which I know, which I don't know. And I just go by the line more or less to just have this like feeling of belonging in one way or another. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, but I just have to do it. So I'm just like doing it.
That's what you're
for now.
doing. Yeah. But are you doing any photography?
Photography, not so much. I think I work with photographs, and it's in a way all the process is interdisciplinary as a process. So it starts with a photograph, strangely. So I do photography actually in that way.
Yeah. You engage.
But I get engaged. Yeah. That's a better word. Yeah, that's a better word for it. I get engaged with photography.
Yeah.
But I will do more photography, I think, on another series, which is similar to the ultrastructure one. But that's electron microscope photography. So it's a different form of photography, but also exciting.
Yeah, amazing. I'd like to talk a little bit about Ladakh as well. You are a co-founder of this amazing platform. Can you tell us how you became a co-founder, how this project came to be?
So that was also very unplanned. It was just two friends getting together, and Sagar Singh, who is an interior architect in India, and also does art. He saw an exhibition, and we met through an exhibition which I was doing in Delhi during that period, and we had mutual friends. So he wanted to collaborate, and we started talking, and then time went by. We were having different ideas on certain things. And then I had this amazing time with Sarah in Ladakh, completely different to that ongoing discussion. And it was sort of life-changing. And again, I know I keep on going about like going back to the youth, but it was...
No, it's interesting because then one can understand why.
We had these amazing holidays in Austria, with my parents and like my cousin and so on, who was in Germany. So we always met once a year in a place callad Bad Gastein, which was like in Austria, and it's a beautiful mountain landscape. And that was sort of that feeling which I didn't have for years, all of a sudden clicked in Ladakh. So these landscapes are incredible. And I think you've seen as well, like the Himalayas.
Yeah. I've been to Ladakh twice.
Oh, there you go. Then you know how it is. Like there's a special energy about the place.
Absolutely.
And that kept in my mind for whatever reason. And then Sagar used to work there as well. So he was doing projects in Ladakh on sites. And we started talking. And since I'm a kid, I was always fascinated by land art. And that also, Polanaru and Anuradhapura, these places were very inspiring to me when I was a kid to see that. And that also kept in my mind, looking at work, Andy Goldsworthy, looking at the land arts of the American West, but also things like Turrell, especially his work, and then also the other works which are not really deciphered at land art were really interesting to me, I think. So all of this came together and we said like, okay, maybe we try something out with land art, which I was not part of my practice. So out of that idea, let's do a collaboration. Let's do something. And then we looked for a site, and then other friends who were running a bike park, which is one of the highest, anything up there is one of the highest for the OSA. But it's amazing bike park, which should change into like a community project for kids to give alternative options, like a high altitude mountain bike park. And they offered us that space to do it. So it's 20 acres of land, which we soon realized it's too much for just 2 artists. And then we started inviting other artists.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
I love how that happens so naturally. And that's how it began.
Yes.
But I mean, when you began, it was known. It was, I mean, we saw it all over, of course, in the media, unfortunately not having been able to be there. And then you've continued. So the project has now kind of evolved. You presented 2 editions in Ladakh, but now you are also working on projects internationally. Can you talk about your most recent one in Australia, in Fremantle?
Yeah, so that's a really beautiful collaboration also. It all came together, I think, naturally, and these connections and the collaborations. Also with the different artists, because to work in that high altitude, it's a break of ego in one way or another, because even if you have a curatorial setup, I think the strongest curator we'll work with is nature, because like wind will come and they say you can't put it there, and all these things has to be thought about. So when we started working, we also wanted to work with people, especially with artists up there, who can understand and tolerate the extremities. So it's very intense to work, I think, but also very beautiful and rewarding because you work with community. So that community which was there, out of that learning and out of the sort of previous experiences from all of us, so like we had Sagar and we had also Jamyang Tengsing, who is a really renowned mountaineer. Also completely different other discipline, but also very crucial to that element. So 3 of us started, but then now, of course, that body, whatever SAR is bigger than just these few people who are doing it. So out of that came also the idea, if there's climate change in Ladakh happening and there's a changing environment, the same must be true for other high altitude locations. So we started these discussions first with, for example, Austria. So I work a lot with the Austrian Cultural Forum. To connect these dots. The Alps might have the same issues as the Ladakh. So that exchange became very interesting, that you can think beyond borders and think more interconnected. And out of that came also discussion with Fremantle, which is the lowest biennale. And Tom Miller, who is running the Fremantle Biennale, when he approached us, there was this really interesting discussion, and he said, right, I'm going to come over. So we went to Ladakh and started mapping out on a balcony, on a piece of paper, which we still have, the ideas we might do.
Yeah, amazing.
And we actually did it. And then there's like, it was really exciting to do all these collaborations with that sort of thinking. So Fremantle was really great for that. So we, for the first time, managed to get 2 Ladakhi artists, young Ladakhi artists, one of Arunima Dasisvanchuk and Tin Sapel, who went over. and did the amazing work there for the Biennale. And now we're going to have Australian artists coming over, Shupi Shongwe, who will be doing work at the Biennale, which we'll have in August. So that exchange happened. We did our individual works for the Biennales, but then also out of that discussion came how these landscapes are connected, something called Shared Skies, a new project, which is under this ongoing exchange, where we looked at how does the night sky and dark sky reserves have a connectivity with ancient stories. So in a way, the search for like connection, like on how do we connect beyond, I think, landscapes. So we are in the process of collecting these stories of First Nation elders in Australia, stories of Ladakhi elders who at 4,500 meters, and then in Australia, with two artists collect these stories, and they will be depicted by a sort of a constellation, what we call it, to like a light installation in the coming years in India and in Australia. So we are looking at connecting there again the sciences with observatory like astrophysicists, with tech, with artists to bring in these stories which are in a way shared but yet so different. So out of this random exchanges sometimes
projects really just keep growing, right? Which is the amazing thing about collaboration.
Yes.
But how many of you are kind of overseeing all these projects with Ladakh?
We have a very small team. I mean, the core of it is very small. So I think in the deeper sense, we are like 10 who are engaged, but then the network is much larger. So when we have the Biennale, it's around 60 people. But then the network itself, I think, is everybody has their own speciality. And so that's a nice thing, I think. So that collaborative part is very important. We have, I think, like our core members, and we have advisory board, which have been amazing with like support and the inputs they're giving. But we want to move away, I think, more and more of like, it's artist run, it's non-white cube, but also it's becoming institutional. So we want to, in that way, create something which has space for new ideas to come in, new leaderships in certain areas to come in. So that's been, again, the art and responsibility part, where we found it interesting, have these exchanges. But then also we've been looking at this year for the first time, how is art for different label communities in the high altitudes? How can we contribute to that? And out of these discussions, we felt, and coming from this like previous space of like development aid, where you go and do projects very quickly, like with art, you need to do it on the long term.
Absolutely.
So that's why we started.
And that's a challenge, isn't it?
It's
keep it going.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
But you're committed to the biennial format.
Yeah.
So that will keep happening.
That will keep happening.
But then beyond this, there are so many other projects that are just kind of branching out.
Yeah, slowly. Yeah. In that kind of context, we also want to be focused, of course, with that.
Yeah.
But then also keep this sort of exploration going as an extent of our own artistic processes, I think, and practices, to keep that freedom, because you don't want to end up, I think, becoming sort of, there needs to be people who manage, and I think you need to also have the head for the creative side of it.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important for us as well to define. And these long-term collaborations help, where we looked at, let's agree on like a decade of working to see how that works, looking at the deep time as well and our impact. So it's actually SAR is a learning platform to like collectively figure things out.
But aren't they all learning platforms? Aren't we all learning in these projects that we begin, if they're in spaces? I think that is the healthiest way to start, even though, yes, you have this commitment to the biennial because it is practical to think about doing something every 2 years, for example. So that just has a practicality around it. But the idea that you can move into, creating institutional spaces that are like, what are we doing with this project in the long run? What are we doing in 10 years? That is important, isn't it? Because you see a lot of what is put out into the art world internationally, that doesn't have that long-term goal. What is it really serving? What are we intending to do? Like, what is our purpose? And I think, it would be ideal if everyone kind of worked with that intention. It's a huge challenge though, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. So it's very exciting to see as well, like, your platform, KALÀ, doing that and also engaging and doing these collaborations regionally. And that's, I think, so important. And I think that's a huge potential for Sri Lanka as well.
Absolutely. It's challenging though, right? Because there are so many spaces you can collaborate in, and when do you say no? And when you have a tiny team, I mean, you said 10 and it's small. I mean, you said that sounds big compared to our KALÀ team. But I mean, it's challenging. And what do you take on? What do you not take on? What is sustainable? Without trying to sound cliche, but honestly, that's what has to be thought through. Especially when we're always challenged by environment and what's going on in the world, right? But you really want to begin these things making sure that they're going to be there in a decade. And therefore, it shouldn't depend on just one person. And those ideas in the brain to sort of think and devise and come up with more creative plans should ideally be separate from like what's actually running things. So I agree. And it's actually, I think, really important to share more and more how these formats can actually mean a lot for art worlds, perhaps more even in the global south, but all over the world. Because the frameworks that exist, there's a lot of discussion in the art world now about the frameworks which have been created and the sustainability of those, for the art ecosystem. And I think it's really wonderful to see projects like what you're doing across the board as a practitioner and as a founder for the arts. It's really, really amazing. So we end our podcast, Raki, with the question, and I'd actually like to ask you if there's another platform or another collective or another space in the arts, international arts ecosystem that you're really following, admiring, looking to at the moment that's just inspiring you.
That's a very good question. I think there are lots of them. I think even KALÀ for what you're doing here.
Exactly.
No, for the region, and I think that's really interesting to like see this connectivity happening. That's definitely one thing. But also I think like Biennale networks which are there to do and have like a discussion around. Is it still? I think the critical questions are like important in terms of. Is it what we're doing just because it's approved by the system and it's acknowledged? Is it still the right thing to do?
Exactly.
So I think these sort of questions I find really interesting, and they're happening now. So all these magazines are bringing this out, and the critical thinking, what is the role of art? Is there a role of art? Are very important. And I think looking at also different platforms which look at things interdisciplinary, because we are not any longer living in a vacuum, in one way or another. Everything is interconnected in that kind of context. So these discussions I find really interesting. And also what you said in terms of ecosystem, that's a very important discussion, I think, because previously we've been always looking for approval from institutions which are set up, which is always sometimes in the West.
Yes.
But how about we create our own institutions?
Absolutely. No, this is a whole other conversation for us, right? But I couldn't agree more because we have a tendency to be completely conditioned in many senses to have to exist in these frameworks. But I don't think these frameworks work in this part of the world. They don't. And when we strive to function within those, I think that's when we face the biggest challenges. And that's why a lot of things haven't continued. We've seen a lot of platforms come and go. But it's because we're thinking in these very sort of restricted mindsets. But what is changing now is the world is so interconnected. The digital space alone has completely changed the art world, right? So we can do so much more. But at the same time, it's not just in the digital space. It's in the realities. It's in the communities. It's in what we give back to the places where these projects are being created. Raki, I could speak to you for another hour. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, let's continue. We'll speak again.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.